Paul and Silas, bound in jail, had no money for to go their bail. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on.
By 1961, the civil rights movement was gearing up for bold action. Civil rights groups such as SNCC, the SCLC, CORE, and the NAACP planned big campaigns in the South. These campaigns aimed to provoke action and draw attention to the cause. Hopefully, the media coverage would force Kennedy to act on civil rights. And these campaigns start with the Freedom Riders. In 1961, CORE sent young black and white activists on buses to the South. The idea was to challenge segregation laws on buses in southern states. In Alabama, state officials promised JFK that they would protect the riders, but they lied, and mobs firebombed the buses and beat the passengers severely.
Segregation must be stopped. It must be broken down. Those of us who are on the Freedom Ride, who will continue the Freedom Ride, I'm not sure that I'll be able to, but we're going on to New Orleans.
Outraged, JFK sent 400 U.S. Marshals to escort the riders to their stop. Media reports of the violence and JFK's action caused a public outcry on the issue, and the JFK administration ordered the integration of all transportation in the United States.
With momentum in the civil rights movement building, the next move comes in 1963. The Southern Christian Leadership Council and Martin Luther King Jr. planned a peaceful march on the city of Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham was notorious as the most segregated city in the United States. During the demonstration, Martin Luther King Jr. is arrested and thrown in jail. While in prison, he writes his famous Letters from a Birmingham Jail Cell. The letters become a manifesto of the movement and declare the goals and aims that King and his followers would like to achieve. They are his blueprint to integrate America. When Martin Luther King Jr. is released from jail, the protests continue in the city of Birmingham. But this time, King stages a children's march. The media had descended on Birmingham and were broadcasting the demonstrations live on TV every night. The Birmingham Police Department came out during the march to break up the demonstrations. The nightly news broadcasted images and video every night to American households of the Birmingham police brutalizing kid protesters in the streets. The police sicked dogs on the protesters. They sprayed them with powerful water hoses, and they beat them. After a growing movement of boycotts and protests, the city of Birmingham gives in and desegregates itself. Americans everywhere were shocked at the images and just how bad racism was in southern cities. President Kennedy was inspired as well. Following the images of the Birmingham March, he immediately proposed a sweeping new civil rights law to be passed through Congress. This law would become the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
With this victory, civil rights groups felt that they had a friend in Kennedy. They challenged Jim Crow laws in other areas of Southern society. With presidential support, they could do away with segregation for good. Their attention turned next to segregation in higher education. In September of 1962, Air Force vet James Meredith wished to enroll as a student in the University of Ole Miss. Once he arrived, the governor of Mississippi refused his entry and blocked the door. Similarly, in June of 1963, notorious Alabama governor George Wallace blocked the door at the University of Alabama to refuse black students. Like the Mississippi governor, he thought it was in his power to enforce state segregation laws. In both cases, Kennedy sent federal troops to ensure that African Americans were admitted by federal law. Federal authority surpasses states' rights in this issue.
With the civil rights movement taking a more violent turn with the Freedom Riders, the Birmingham March, and the integration of Ole Miss and the University of Alabama, Martin Luther King Jr. and civil rights leaders intended to reshift the focus of the movement to nonviolence. This message would be delivered through the March on Washington. In August 1963, 200,000 civil rights supporters gathered on the National Mall and marched to the Lincoln Memorial. The sight of huge crowds calling for change called attention to the civil rights bill that President Kennedy had proposed. Members of Congress and the Senate felt pressure to pass the law and to enhance equality for blacks in America. The crowd was a mixture of African Americans, whites, women, children, and men. It was a broad endorsement of equal rights across the races in America. Once at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his powerful "I Have a Dream" speech. The speech was recorded and rebroadcasted late at night and printed in the next day's newspapers. The sight of huge crowds calling for change and the voice of Martin Luther King Jr. on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial called attention to the civil rights bill that President Kennedy had proposed. Members of Congress and the Senate felt immense pressure to pass the law in order to enhance equality for blacks. Ultimately, the March on Washington helped lead to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.